Since I was a child, I was never the pampered princess, protected in silk and luxury. The good things in life always seemed to turn their backs on me. But when foreign invaders crossed our borders and put the frontier in peril, it was I, and no one else, who was the first to be pushed onto the battlefield as a human shield. Midst the clashing of swords and the chaos of war, I was pinned against a cold, jagged rock by a man. The blade in my hand trembled as I blocked his heavy saber, which was inching closer by the second. One more breath, and that sharp, cold steel would tear through my throat. His face was right before mine, so close that his hot breath scorched my skin, burning every cell. His eyes glowed like the sun over the vast grasslands, possessing the wild beauty characteristic of the nomadic tribes. But now, and that light held only cold, lethal intent. A gaze as frozen as ice, ready to take my life if I faltered. I knew that if I could only lift my blade a little higher, I too could cut his throat and end this confrontation. On the battlefield, there is no room for escape or choices. There are only the living and the dead. Everything else is meaningless. The first encounter, I gritted my teeth, gathering every ounce of strength to duck beneath his blade. His saber swung down with immense force, missing my throat but striking my jade hairpin. My long hair fell, cascading softly like leaves shedding from a branch. Through the curtain of my messy hair, my eyes met his through streaks of blood. I was ready to counterattack, but this time, he didn't lunge forward. We both stepped back simultaneously, panting, our eyes locked in a fierce and calculating stare. It was only then that I noticed a deep wound on his abdomen. Blood was soaking through his clothes. He looked no different from me, a soul worn down to exhaustion by the battlefield. A woman? His voice rasped, filled with both surprise and fatigue. He hurriedly pressed his hand against his wound. I froze for a moment, hearing him speak fluent Han Chinese. But there was no time for shock. The sight of my comrades' charred bodies scattered across the ground blurred my sanity. A blind rage, like a tidal wave, urged me to fight on. With eyes burning red, I charged again. But within a few moves, he used the blunt side of his blade to strike me down. He was superior to me. That was painfully clear. I bit my tongue and tried to push myself up, but my exhausted body refused to obey. The wounds and blood loss had taken my last bit of strength. He stood there, looking down at me from above. A surge of helplessness exploded within me, and I screamed, my voice choking. "Kill me! Just kill me!" His saber rose, the steel gleaming in the pale dawn light. I closed my eyes, ready for death. But instead of pain, I felt only a cold gust of wind brush past my ear. Then, a stinging heat on my shoulder. A sharp clang rang out. His blade had fallen to the ground. "I do not kill women." His words were short, piercing through my pride like a knife. He turned his back, his gait unsteady but still exuding a sense of resilience. Step by step, he left the battlefield under the morning sun. Tears suddenly welled up, accompanied by a cry of pure resentment. "If you don't kill me today, I will surely kill you in the future." He paused, turning his head to look at me. He flashed a faint, strangely gentle smile. "That's fine. At least next time we meet, we will both still be alive." The aftermath. The sun rose slowly, its pale gold light stretching across the land, illuminating every blood-stained mound and every broken piece of armor. As his figure vanished into the silent wilderness, only the wind remained, carrying the heavy scent of blood and the groans of tattered battle flags. I wiped my tears and dragged myself through the ruins, hoping to find a single breath of life. But everywhere I looked, there were only the bodies of my comrades, familiar faces now frozen in time. Finally, by the riverbank, my eyes landed on a dented wine flask, crushed by horse hooves. It was the flask belonging to fourth brother Tam, the man who, only last night, had sat with me by the campfire, drinking and laughing. Recently, I had been stationed with Tam Lian near the Whitewater River. Tam Lian, or fourth brother as I called him, was the best archer in the camp. A long scar ran from his cheek to the corner of his eye, yet it couldn't dim his refined and scholarly aura. Last night, in the flickering firelight, he handed me the flask and asked warmly, "Want a sip?" I hesitated but took it, taking a large gulp. The spicy liquid seared down my throat like fire, spreading through my chest and turning into a sudden tear. I wiped my eyes, the sting of the wine bringing back a sharp longing for my ninth brother, the only person who had protected me since childhood. Tam Lian looked at me, flustered, and then laughed heartily. He took a long drink, his laughter mingling with the night wind. It seems His Highness the Ninth Prince is drinking for the first time. I nodded sheepishly. He didn't know that most people in the camp, including him, had no idea I wasn't Prince Tu Huai, as the court records stated. I was Princess Than Nin, Tiu Nuok Ngu, a disgraced princess from the Inner Palace. English audio script, Part 2, The Substitute Prince. The falling empire. 2 months ago, the Uhuan tribes swept south. The borders of Great Chu were shattered. Our empire, built on a foundation of 1,000 years of agriculture, suddenly found itself fragile beneath the iron hooves of the grassland cavalry. In these long years of peace, our people had grown accustomed to luxury, immersed in poetry, painting, and the arts. Weapons had become foreign objects. Skilled generals were rare in the court. The emperor, wary of granting too much power to frontier commanders who rarely returned to the capital, made a temporary compromise. He would send a prince to lead the campaign. When the emperor announced this decision, the crown prince stared at the sky. The third prince kept his head bowed, focused intently on the floor. The sixth prince covered his mouth, whispering softly, "Father, your servant is afraid of blood." The seventh prince laughed faintly, stroking the incense pouch at his waist. He spoke as if merely musing aloud. "Father, if a marriage alliance is the solution, wouldn't sending Than Nin cause the Yuhuan to withdraw their troops?" When I was summoned to the Qianan Palace, what I saw was a pack of wolves and tigers ready to tear me apart. The crown prince spoke on behalf of our father. "Than Nin, for the sake of the country, you must sacrifice a little." I stood there, head bowed, silenced by the weight of their words. But just as I was about to open my mouth, a familiar voice echoed from behind. "Than Nin cannot go." Turning around, I saw my ninth brother. He sat in his wheelchair, his face pale, but his eyes were filled with an unwavering resolve as he slowly entered the hall. He passed by me, his cold gaze sweeping over everyone in the room. Since its founding, Great Chu has never ceded land, never paid tribute, and certainly never offered a princess for peace, he declared firmly. If we send a princess to beg for mercy, would that not stain the honor of our dynasty and foul our emperor's brilliant reputation? Looking at my brother's back, I knew he was suppressing a deep fury. Our father shifted his gaze to the blanket covering ninth brother's legs. "If not Than Nin," the emperor asked pensively, "then who can go to battle?" I saw ninth brother's hands clench on his lap. The helplessness in his eyes made my heart ache. I stepped to his side, gently patted his shoulder, and raised my head high to look at the emperor. "Father, I will go to battle myself." The journey north. After the Great Chu dynasty declared war on the Yuhuan, an imperial decree was issued. The ninth prince, Tio Huai, was tasked as the deputy general to escort grain and supplies from the capital to the border. But behind this order lay a secret plan known to no one. On paper, it was ninth brother, but the one who actually donned the armor and headed to the frontier was me. I tied my hair high and put on the cold, a heavy suit of armor. I left behind every trace of a woman's weakness in the imperial city and headed north with a determination never to look back. Only 2 months had passed, but amidst the frost and wind of the borderlands, remembering the prosperous capital felt like recalling a past life. The return to camp. Under the starry sky, the flickering torchlight reflected in Tam Lian's eyes. I found myself asking him, "General Tam, everyone calls you fourth brother. Where are your first, second, and third brothers now?" His gaze fell. The light in his eyes seemed to extinguish. He stood up, hands behind his back, and took a few steps forward. A heavy sigh escaped into the stillness. "They have all fallen on the battlefield." I went numb, instantly regretting that I had reopened his wound. Tam Lian turned back, his voice hoarse but still as gentle as if he were telling a story from a long time ago. "The battlefield is like that, Your Highness. It is more cruel than anything you can imagine. Years ago, the third brother and I were sitting by the river drinking water. In the blink of an eye, an arrow pierced his throat. I didn't even have time for grief. I could only draw my sword, jump on my horse, and charge into the fray. The cold wind blew, making his hair flutter. I noticed that amongst the black, there were already several strands of silver, though he was not yet old. There is no right or wrong in war, he continued. In a single heartbeat, it will take away anyone you love. Just like now, you and I can still talk. But who knows if tomorrow, I will lie forever on this soil. 2 hours later, his prophecy became reality. The enemy launched a surprise night attack. Amidst the red flames and the clashing of steel, I watched Tam Lian fire his last arrows, then draw his sword for a final stand. But in the end, a curved blade pierced through his chest. He fell. His eyes looked up at the distant sky, his lips curling into a soft smile before they closed forever. I tried to rush to him, but countless enemy blades blocked my path. The short distance between us suddenly became an eternal void. The enemy cavalry surged forward, sweeping me into the freezing Whitewater River. The current carried me away, along with my consciousness. When I woke on the riverbank, the world was so silent I thought it had forgotten me. Stumbling back toward the old camp, I accidentally ran into that tribesman again. He was also wounded, looking exhausted, but his eyes were still as bright as cold stars. I wanted to ask him, when he threw his blade aside, did his heart feel the same sorrow as mine? But in this war, it seemed no one had the right to speak of pain anymore. I sat by the river, clutching Tam Lian's dented wine flask, quietly watching the water flow. The sun was high now, its brilliant light trying to erase the remnants of the night. But my heart remained heavy. I could not shake the loss. I remembered his last words from the night before. "General Tam, if the war ends one day, what do you want to do?" He had been silent for a long time, then smiled a shy smile, completely different from his usual self. "Perhaps I would be a school teacher." I looked down at the flask in my hand. A faint smile touched my lips. Tucking the flask into my robes, I whispered a promise. "Fourth brother, if you cannot fulfill this wish, I will do it for you." Standing up to face the sunlight, I looked east, where the main army was waiting. Even if the path ahead was filled with blood and storms, I had to move forward. The reunion. For 3 days and 3 nights, I did not sleep. I crossed the vast grasslands until, at sunset on the 3rd day, the silhouette of the great camp finally appeared on the horizon. A long horn blast from the watchtower broke the silence. A scout galloped out to meet me. As he drew near, I recognized him. It was Bui Tuyen. He leapt from his horse and practically threw himself in front of me, tears streaming down his face. "Princess, you've finally returned. If anything had happened to you, How could I ever answer to the ninth prince? I pursed my lips and gave a thin smile. Why are you crying like a woman? A grown man crying like a pear blossom in the rain? You should be ashamed. Boytuyan, embarrassed, wiped his tears, his voice cracking. Is the princess injured? Let me take you for treatment. I shook my head. Boytuyan, help me fix my hairpin. Once my hair was neatly tied back, my identity as a woman was hidden once more. After a quick wash with cold water, I didn't linger. I walked straight into the central command tent. From outside, I could already hear a heated argument. Why can't you give me more troops? Are we just going to let fourth brother and the prince die in vain? The youthful, spirited voice belonged to Mukhtun Hung. He was arguing with his father. I sighed, unfeeling a headache coming on from the noise. Before I could decide whether to wait for them to calm down, a teacup flew out of the tent and shattered at my feet. I frowned, pushed aside the curtain, and stepped in. The atmosphere inside instantly turned silent. Both father and son stared at me as if they were trying to determine if I was a ghost. I looked straight at Muktunung and said, I'm not dead yet. What are you doing here, arguing with your father? Have you no shame? General Mook stood frozen, his eyes red as if he were about to cry. I stepped forward, clasped my hands in a formal greeting, and said sternly, Uncle. 3 days ago, our troops at the Whitewater River were ambushed. I have urgent matters to report. Toi hiroa, toi sebamsat noi dong gok tu file. Hong tu item kat tieuje, nhu chapter hai part, Wagyu jung machtruyenje ben lam audio. Duoi jai la fantiep theo kua bandich sang tieng an. Taptrong vau jo an joy toai tai doan traiva dien bien sao jo. General Muck stared at me, his eyes reddening as if he were about to cry. I stepped forward, clasped my hands in a formal greeting and said sternly, Uncle. 3 days ago, our troops at the Whitewater River were ambushed. I have urgent matters to report. Muktunung looked at me, then at his father. He suddenly knelt down and shouted, General, the prince has returned. We must send troops to recover the Whitewater River immediately. General Mook let out a long sigh. He looked at me with eyes full of weariness and said, Huine He, you have worked hard. Go rest first. We will discuss the military situation later. I shook my head. No, Uncle. I cannot rest. I saw the enemy's main force. They aren't just raiding, they are planning a full-scale invasion. We need to reinforce the western flank before dawn. The room went silent. General Muck looked at the map on the table, then back at me. Do you know what you are saying? If we move the troops now, the Central Pass will be undefended. I will take responsibility, I replied firmly. If the enemy breaks through the west, the Central Pass won't matter anyway. We will be surrounded. After a long silence, General Mook finally nodded. Fine. Tunung, take 5,000 cavalry and follow the prince's lead. We set out under the cover of darkness. The wind at the border was like a whip against my face. As we rode, Muktunung pulled his horse closer to mine. Are you really okay? He whispered. You look like you've seen a ghost. I didn't look at him. I've seen more than ghosts, Tunung. I've seen brave men die for a cause they didn't fully understand. I just want to make sure their deaths weren't in vain. We reached the western ridge just as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon. Below us, the enemy camp was beginning to stir. I pulled my horse to a halt and raised my hand. Wait for my signal, I commanded. Beside me, I could hear the nervous breathing of the soldiers. This was it. There was no turning back. Just then, a scout returned, breathless. Your Highness, General, there's a small group of riders approaching from the enemy's rear. They look like our men. My heart skipped a beat. Could it be survivors from the Whitewater River? How many? I asked. No more than 10, sir. but they are being pursued by a large enemy unit. I didn't hesitate. Tunong, take half the men and intercept the pursuers. I'll lead the rest to cover the survivors. But the plan has changed. Move! I spurred my horse down the slope. The ground blurred beneath me. As I got closer, I saw a familiar figure leading the small group. His armor was shattered, and he was covered in blood, but he still rode with the ferocity of a wolf. It was him, the man from the river. He saw me approaching, and for a split second, our eyes met. There was no time for words. I swung my sword, cutting down the first enemy rider who dared to get close to him. "Follow me!" I shouted to the survivors. We fought our way back up the ridge. The sound of clashing steel and screams filled the air. By the time we reached the safety of our lines, I was gasping for air, my muscles aching with every movement. I dismounted and ran toward the man. He had fallen from his horse, his breath coming in ragged gasps. I knelt beside him, my hands trembling as I checked his wounds. "Why?" I whispered. "Why did you come back?" He looked up at me, a faint, bloody smile on his lips. "I told you. I would see how long your stubbornness lasts. I couldn't let you die before I got my answer." I stared at him, unable to speak. In the middle of this bloody war, between two enemies who should have been trying to kill each other, something had shifted. The battle was far from over, but in that moment, the world felt very small. Just me, and a man who was supposed to be my enemy, both of us clinging to life in a land that wanted us dead. I stepped out of the tent, the cold air immediately biting at my skin. The moon was high, casting long, eerie shadows across the camp. I could still hear the muffled voices of General Mook and his son arguing inside, but their words felt distant now. My mind was fixed on the man I had just seen, Ha Lan Uyen. Even in his weakened state, he possessed a presence that commanded the space around him. He was a predator, even when wounded. And yet, there was something in his eyes when he looked at me, a flicker of recognition, or perhaps something deeper. I walked toward the makeshift infirmary where the survivors were being held. The smell of blood and damp earth was thick in the air. I found him lying on a thin mat, his chest bandaged, his breathing shallow but steady. "You're still awake," I said softly, sitting on a wooden stool beside him. He didn't open his eyes. Hard to sleep when the person who stabbed me is sitting 3 feet away. I felt a sharp pang of guilt, though I tried to mask it. I did what I had to do. You were the enemy. And now? He opened his eyes then, and the intensity of his gaze made me want to look away. What am I now, Tiu Nuok Nu? A guest? A prisoner? Or just a curiosity for a princess playing soldier? "You are a survivor," I replied, standing up to leave. "For now, that is enough." As I reached the door, his voice stopped me. "The North won't stop with the Whitewater River. They know you are here. They know the 9th prince is a ghost. Sleep with one eye open, princess." I didn't turn back. I couldn't. If I did, he might see the fear I was trying so hard to hide. The next few days were a blur of military preparations. We reinforced the western flank and sent scouts deep into the grasslands. Every moment was spent preparing for an attack that we knew was coming. But the attack didn't come from the grasslands. It came from within. One evening, as I was reviewing the supply manifests in my tent, a shadow fell across the entrance. I looked up, expecting Bui Tuyen or Muk Tun Hung. Instead, I saw a figure dressed in the dark robes of the Imperial Guard. "Your Highness," the man said, bowing low, "I bring a message from the capital." My heart sank. A message from the capital usually meant trouble. I took the sealed scroll from his hand and dismissed him. As I broke the wax seal and read the words, the blood drained from my face. The Emperor was calling for the 9th Prince's immediate return. There were rumors of treason, rumors that the prince was not who he claimed to be. My secret was unraveling. I had to make a choice. If I returned, the army would be leaderless, and the border would fall. If I stayed, I would be branded a traitor to the crown. I sat in the silence of my tent for a long time, the scroll clutched in my hand. I thought of my brother, Tiu Huai, sitting in his wheelchair, his dreams of glory shattered. I thought of Tam Lien and the men who had died in the river. I wouldn't go back. Not yet. I stood up, threw the scroll into the brazier, and watched as the flames consumed the Emperor's command. I would finish what we started here, whatever the cost. I stepped out into the night and made my way to the infirmary once more. Halan Uyen was sitting up now, leaning against the wall. He watched me approach with a knowing look. "You look like a woman who has just burned her bridge," he said. "I have," I replied, sitting across from him. "And I need your help." He laughed, a harsh, dry sound. A princess asking an enemy general for help. The world truly is ending. "The world is changing," I countered. "Tell me what you know about the internal factions of the Yuhuan. Tell me how to stop the invasion before it reaches the Central Pass, and I will give you your freedom." He went silent, his eyes searching mine. After what felt like an eternity, he reached out a hand. "Deal." Buituyan was still wiping away his tears, his voice trembling as he spoke. "Princess, you have finally returned. If anything had happened to you, how could I ever face the 9th prince?" I managed a weak smile and looked at him. "Why are you crying like that? A grown man weeping like a girl. You should be ashamed. Is my identity exposed?" He shook his head quickly. "No, no one knows. I told everyone you were exhausted and needed to rest. But General Mook is waiting for you in the main tent. He seems very concerned." I nodded, taking a deep breath to steady myself. I adjusted the heavy armor on my shoulders and walked toward the center of the camp. The soldiers I passed bowed their heads in respect, calling me Your Highness. Every time I heard that title, a cold shiver ran down my spine. They were bowing to a ghost, a substitute for a brother who couldn't walk, let alone lead an army. Inside the tent, General Mook was staring at a map, his face etched with deep lines of worry. His son, Mook Tun Hung, stood beside him, looking frustrated. When they saw me, the tension in the room seemed to break for a moment. "Why, you've worked hard," General Mook said, his voice heavy. "We heard about the ambush at Whitewater River. How did you survive?" "The current carried me downstream," I replied, keeping my voice low and steady. "But my troops, most of them didn't make it. General Tam Lien is gone." Mook Tu Nung slammed his fist onto the table. "Those bastards! We should have sent reinforcements sooner. Father, let me take the vanguard and strike back." "Sit down, Tu Nung," the general barked. Then he turned back to me. "There is something strange about this attack. The enemy knew exactly where you would be. I fear there is a leak in our communication." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. A leak. And that meant someone wanted the 9th prince dead. Or perhaps they wanted me dead. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. The silence of the camp was more suffocating than the noise of battle. I wrapped a dark cloak around my shoulders and made my way to the restricted area where the high-ranking prisoners were kept. I stopped in front of a heavy iron grate. Inside, sitting in the shadows, was Halan Uyen. He was no longer the terrifying commander on the battlefield, but even in chains, his presence was overwhelming. He looked up, his eyes catching the faint moonlight. "So, the little prince comes to visit," he mocked, his voice smooth and dangerous. "Or should I call you by your real name?" My heart stopped for a beat. I stepped closer to the bars. "What are you talking about?" He laughed softly, a sound that sent chills through me. I've spent enough time on the battlefield to know the difference between a man's frame and a woman's. And your scent? It doesn't belong in a place of blood and iron. You are Princess Than Nin, aren't you? The sacrificial pawn of Great Chu. I reached for the dagger at my waist, but he didn't move. He just watched me with that unsettling, knowing smile. "Kill me if you want," he said, "but it won't change the fact that your own family sent you here to die. They didn't expect you to survive the river. They didn't expect you to come back at all." "Why are you telling me this?" I hissed. "Because we are the same," he replied, leaning his head against the cold stone wall. "Discarded by the people we served. I was captured because my own king feared my influence. And you are here because your father needed a body to fill a suit of armor." I stared at him, my hand trembling on the hilt of my blade. Everything he said was a poison that I knew to be true. "What do you want, Halan Uyen?" "I want to see how this story ends," he whispered. "I want to see if a pawn can actually take the king." I turned away and walked back into the darkness, his laughter echoing in my ears. The war outside was terrifying, but the war inside the palace walls was far more deadly. I wasn't just fighting for my country anymore. I was fighting for my life against the very people I was supposed to protect. I returned to my own tent, the sound of the wind outside like a relentless reminder of the world I was trying to hold together. Boy Tuyen was waiting for me, his face pale under the flickering candlelight. "Your Highness, a messenger arrived from the capital. It is a secret decree from the Crown Prince." I took the scroll. My hands were cold. The Crown Prince was not asking about the war. He was asking about the 9th Prince's health. He was testing me. He wanted to know if the person here was truly Tu Huai, or if the miraculous recovery they had heard of was a lie. "What should we do?" Bui Tuyen whispered. "We tell them the truth, but only half of it," I replied, my eyes fixed on the flame. "Tell them the prince is still recovering from a grievous wound sustained at the Whitewater River, that he is unable to travel, that he is barely conscious." I knew this was only a temporary fix. In the capital, my brothers were like vultures, waiting for a single slip-up. But here, at the border, the enemy was real, and they were closer than we thought. The next morning I went to see Halan Uyen again. He was sitting up, eating a bowl of thin porridge. He looked more human now, less like a god of war, but the danger still clung to him. "You're late," he said without looking up. "I have an army to run," I countered. He let out a short, mocking laugh. "You have an army to hide. There is a difference." I ignored his remark and sat across from him. "You said the North would not stop. How do they plan to bypass our defenses?" He set the bowl down and leaned forward. The air between us grew heavy. "They do not need to bypass them. They already have someone on the inside who will open the gates." My breath hitched. "Who?" "I do not know the name. Only that a deal was struck long ago. A princess for a border province. A life for a kingdom." I stood up abruptly, and the stool scraping against the dirt floor. He watched me, his eyes dark and unreadable. "Why tell me this? If the North wins, you get your freedom. You get to go home." He stood up too, despite his injuries. He was much taller than me, his shadow swallowing mine. "Because Tu Nuok Nu, I have decided I would rather see you win than see those cowards succeed. A warrior respects strength. I see no strength in the men who sent you here." I left the tent before I could say anything else. My mind was racing. If what he said was true, the enemy was not just in front of me. They were behind me, in the capital, and perhaps even within this very camp. I found Muk Tunung near the stables. He was sharpening his sword, his face set in a grim expression. "Tu Nung," I called out. He looked up, and for a moment, I saw the boy I used to play with in the palace gardens before the war changed us both. We need to move the grain supplies. Tonight. He frowned. Tonight? But the general said, I am the prince in command, I interrupted, my voice hard. And I am telling you to move the supplies to the northern pass. Do not tell anyone, not even your father. Tu Nung hesitated, then nodded. As you command, Your Highness. As the sun began to set, casting a bloody red glow over the grasslands, I realized I was no longer just a substitute. I was a player in a game of life and death. I looked back at the tent where Halan Uyen was held. He was an enemy, a killer, and a man who could destroy me with a single word. And yet, in this entire camp of thousands, he was the only one who truly knew who I was. The weight of the secret felt like the armor on my chest, heavy, cold, and suffocating. But I could not take it off. Not until the war was over. I walked toward the edge of the camp and stared out at the dark horizon. Somewhere out there, the Huan were waiting. And somewhere behind me, my own family was waiting for me to fail. I will not let them, I whispered to the wind. I will not be their sacrifice. The supply wagons moved silently under the cover of the new moon. Tu Nung looked back at me once, his face a mask of uncertainty, but he didn't stop. He trusted me, or perhaps he trusted the ghost of the 9th prince I had become. I returned to the prison cell. Halan Uyen was waiting. He didn't say a word as I unlocked the heavy iron door. He stepped out, his movements stiff but graceful, like a predator regaining its strength. You are taking a great risk, princess, he whispered. If we are caught, no title will save you. I am already a dead woman in the eyes of the capital, I replied, my voice cold. I have nothing left to lose but this border, and I will not lose it. We rode out of the camp together, two shadows against the vastness of the northern plains. He led the way, his knowledge of the terrain far superior to mine. As we moved, he told me of the secret paths the Huan used, the hidden valleys where they gathered their strength. There is a pass 3 miles to the east, he said, pointing toward the jagged peaks. It is narrow, easily defended. If your supplies reach there, the North will have no choice but to engage you on your terms. And the traitor? I asked. Halan Uyen slowed his horse until he was riding beside me. The traitor is not one person, but a network. They don't want the North to win. They just want the 9th prince to fail. They want to prove that the emperor's choice was a mistake, so they can install their own puppet on the throne. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just a war for land. It was a war for the future of the empire. And I was the only thing standing in their way. Hours later, we reached the pass. The supplies were already being positioned. Tu Nung looked surprised to see the enemy general riding at my side, but he held his tongue. The night was long, filled with the sounds of preparations. I stood at the edge of the ridge, looking out at the darkness. Halan Uyen came to stand beside me. Why help me? I asked, without looking at him. Because, he said softly, his voice catching in the wind, or in a world of lies and shadows, you are the only thing that feels real. I looked at him then, and for the first time, I didn't see an enemy. I saw a man who was as lost as I was. Before I could say anything, a horn blast echoed through the valley. The enemy was here. The air in the command tent was thick with tension. General Muk Lang, my uncle, looked at me with eyes as cold as the northern frost. He didn't see a prince. He saw a girl who shouldn't be on a battlefield. From now on, you stay in the rear, he commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. The kitchens are short-handed. You'll serve there. I felt the sting of his words. I had crossed hundreds of miles, survived a massacre at Whitewater River, and yet, I was being pushed back into the shadows. But in the army, a command was absolute. I stepped out of the tent, and the weight of the sunset heavy on my shoulders. It was Mook Toon Hung who found me later, leaning against a grain wagon. He was chewing on a piece of straw, a mischievous glint in his eyes. "Don't let the old man get to you, brother," he said, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "He's just stubborn. Listen, there's a big move coming. We're heading for the Dala Highlands. It's going to be a bloodbath." I looked at him, my resolve hardening. "I'm not staying in the kitchen, Tunung." He laughed, but his expression soon turned serious. "Then you'd better be ready. We're crossing the snow mountains. If we take the heights before the Ohuan do, we might just win this war." Weeks passed in a blur of ice and exhaustion. I traded my ladle for a blade once more, sneaking into the scouting party led by Toon Hung. We navigated treacherous caves and paths buried under feet of snow. Every breath was a struggle, every step a gamble against the abyss. But we found it. A hidden pass that led straight to the heart of the enemy's flank. When the main force arrived, the battle for the highlands was swift and brutal. I watched from the ridges as our banners finally flew over the peak. For a moment, I thought of Tam Lien and the cup of wine we shared. I had kept my promise. But the war wasn't over. The real thorn in our side was the city of Duzhou, guarded by the veteran General Hado. He was a fox, seasoned and cruel. Our frontal assaults failed time and again, leaving the walls stained with the blood of our men. "We can't break them from the outside," I told Bui Tuyen as we watched the city lights from our camp. "Someone needs to go in, a someone they won't expect." Bui Tuyen's face went pale. "Princess, you can't be serious. It's a suicide mission." "I am the 9th prince," I replied, my voice steady. "And the 9th prince doesn't hide while his men die." Under the cover of a moonless night, I slipped onto a supply boat. The river was a ribbon of black silk, carrying me toward the lion's den. I moved like a ghost through the streets of Duzhou, my target clear: General Hado. I found him in his private quarters, drunk on victory and wine. The struggle was brief. I used the poisoned hairpin, the only feminine thing I had left, to end his life. But as his body hit the floor, the door burst open. I wasn't met by guards. I was met by him. Halan Uyen stood there, his silhouette framed by the torchlight. He didn't look surprised. In fact, he looked almost relieved. "You're late, little fish," he said softly, using the name he had given me on the riverbank. "I came to finish what we started," I hissed, raising my blade. He didn't draw his sword. Instead, he walked toward me until the tip of my sword pressed against his chest. "Then do it. But know this. My brother, the Crown Prince, has already abandoned this city. He's left me here to die, just to buy himself time to retreat. We are both pawns in a game played by kings who don't care if we bleed." I hesitated. The hatred I felt was real, but so was the exhaustion in his eyes. "Why tell me this?" "Because," he whispered, reaching out to touch the scar on my shoulder, "in this frozen wasteland, you are the only fire I've ever known." Outside, the horns of the Great Chu army began to wail. The siege had begun. The city of Duzhou fell within 3 days. The walls that once seemed impregnable were now nothing but rubble and ash. I stood atop the highest tower, watching the black smoke rise into the pale morning sky. Halan Uyen stood beside me. He had surrendered the city, not out of fear, but as a final act of defiance against the crown prince who had abandoned him. We were two ghosts standing amidst the ruins of a war that had tried to consume us both. But victory brought no peace. A week later, a messenger arrived from the capital. He did not bring rewards or honors. He brought a small wooden box containing a strip of white silk, a silent command from the crown prince for me to take my own life. The secret of the ninth prince was too dangerous to be allowed back into the palace. My brothers wanted a hero to mourn, and not a sister who had proven herself more capable than all of them combined. Even my father, the emperor, had remained silent. His silence was a blade sharper than any enemy's sword. I held the white silk in my hand, feeling its cold, smooth texture. Halan Uyen took it from me and threw it into the brazier. We watched together as the flames turned the royal command into gray dust. "Let them think you are dead," he said, his voice low and steady. "The ninth prince died a hero's death in the fires of Duzhou. The world is wide, little fish. Why stay in a pond that only wants to drown you?" I looked at him, and for the first time in my life, I felt the weight of the heavy armor lift from my heart. "Where would we go?" "Anywhere the wind blows," he replied, reaching out to take my hand. "To the grasslands, to the mountains, or to a place where no one knows our names." That night, we left. We left behind the titles, the blood-stained soil, and the cold walls of the imperial city. To the Great Chu, I was a legend carved in stone. To the north, he was a traitor vanished into the mist. Years later, the air in the valley was sweet with the scent of wildflowers and pine. I sat on the porch of our small wooden house, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of violet and gold. The scars on my shoulders still ached when the mountain air grew cold, but it was a small price to pay for the stillness I had found. I heard the sound of footsteps behind me. Halan Uyen sat down and placed a hand on the scar on my shoulder, the mark from the battle at Shuzhou. "I still haven't forgiven myself for leaving you alone that day," he whispered. I wrinkled my nose and leaned back against him. "You're thinking too much again. You're like a beehive, always buzzing with old worries." He chuckled, the sound deep and warm against my back. "A beehive? Your metaphors haven't improved with age, my lady." I turned around, moving closer until I could see the reflection of the sunset in his eyes. "Halan Uyen, you truly meant it? That you would agree to anything I say?" He raised an eyebrow, a familiar glint of amusement in his gaze. "I did. My word is my bond." I wrapped my arms around his neck and whispered into his ear, my voice soft but filled with a new kind of hope. "Then, let's have a child." He froze for a second, his eyes widening in surprise. Then a slow, genuine smile spread across his face, the kind of smile he never wore on the battlefield. He pulled me into a tight embrace, burying his face in my hair. "Yes," he whispered. "A child who will never know the weight of a crown. A child who will only know the peace of this valley." The sun dipped below the horizon, leaving the world in a soft blue twilight. The war was a lifetime away. The princess and the general were gone. There was only us. And for the first time, the ending was not a sacrifice. It was a beginning.